Welcome everyone to SaaS Talks 18. And this is a bit of a special edition with Deepak Anchala, who I'm going to introduce shortly. He has been actually on one of the SaaS Talks in the past as well. But what makes this special is that today is a bit of a different format. In general, we always say that these are not going to be about rags to riches story. But I hate to say this, today is a bit of a rags to riches story. And the intent is to discover the journey that Slintel took right from its inception to its exit. As many people already know that recently Slintel got acquired by 6sense, which is a leading account engagement SaaS company out of the Bay Area. Slintel itself is a DaaS company, data as a service company, which is in the sales intelligence space. The other difference for today's session will be that between Arpit and I, we will probably dominate more questions than we have in the past. Though, of course, we will keep it open for Q&A as we always do, but we are not going to bring anybody on screen today. So all Q&A will be handled via the Q&A panel today. So with that background, let me first welcome Deepak. And Deepak, congratulations to you on a phenomenal journey and a phenomenal exit that you just had with 6sense. And thank you also for giving us the chance to participate in this journey from as close a distance as is possible without ourselves being on the ship directly. So thank you for everything and welcome to SaaS Talks 18.
No, my pleasure, Alok. I think you were the first check almost the first check in the company, and it's coincidental that we're speaking at the very end of the journey as well. So yeah, my pleasure.
Great. So Deepak, today I'm actually going to unravel from the beginning to the end. And I always, one of the things that when we came in, and I think this was back sometime in 2018 is what I recollect. But I remember the discussions we had on how you bootstrap this company to begin with. I remember that at one point you used to work with Traction. And then after you left Traction, just the way you bootstrap this company, I think was just super inspirational for me. And if I may confess, my kids as well, by the way, they've heard the story from me as well. And I think it'll be very useful for people to hear, how did the idea of Slintel come to your mind? How did you put the founding team together? And how did you actually bootstrap this before it, of course, became what it became eventually?
Sure, Alok. Yeah. I think pretty interesting story. If I just go back down the memory lane, I think it was November 2016 when I had just quit Traction and decided to start up. The reason for starting up was, I was in sales in Traction and Cognizant prior to that. And every time we would pick up the phone and talk to a prospect, we would ask the same questions, right? The band questionnaire: what's your budget? What's your authority, need, timeline? What tools do you use? All of that. And I kept thinking, we are living in a data world, like information world, and we still ask these questions. Buyers are getting more and more sophisticated. They have so much more resources. And as sellers, we are just acting as dumb people, right? Like we just ask dumb questions. So that's when, we thought, like, can we mine data and can we provide insights or a layer on top that makes sellers better at selling and also helps buyers in the long run too. So that was the genesis of the idea, Alok. That time it was just a rough idea. No, we had no idea on how to build a product, right? It was just a rough idea. So what I ended up doing when I left Traction was I talked to a couple of entrepreneur friends and I just pitched the idea to them. And they said, yeah, it's a good idea. So what, right? So, and then I asked them, like, they were in the HR space. I said, if we help you know, because, the HR tech space, you have to like integrate with ATSs or payroll system. So we asked them, if we told you like the tech stack, the HR tech stack of your prospect companies, would that help you? And they said, yes. I said, do you have the information today? They said, no. They said, okay, maybe we can get that for you. And we didn't have any single engineer in the company, right? So what I ended up doing was I asked Ranjana at that time, who left Traction too, if she wanted to join. She said yes. And we hired a small team. And we were a services company initially, right? We said, we put resources on it, and we said every month, the contracts were such that every month we would give you technographics for say 1,000 companies, and we charge like $1,000 for that per month, right? So yeah, a couple of friends at that time said, yeah, this sounds interesting. So that's how we started. We did that for like quite a bit of time before we even like hired our first engineers. So the initial founding journey, Alok, was we didn't have any engineers initially, right? You know how difficult it is to find engineering co-founders and engineers to join you. It's next to impossible. It's more tougher than getting VC money. So I had this initial team, but I remember I went to every single co-founder dating program that was there in the Valley, everywhere, right? And I would raise my hand and pitch for a tech co-founder. And the ratio was more skewed than the boy-girl ratio in IIT, right? There would be 50 business founders and then one tech guy, and everybody would be like, yeah, will you join hands with me? That guy would be in Google, and he would have all the golden parachutes. And it was super difficult to find tech people. So a few months after we were doing this engagement, I reached out to all my IIT friends that time, and some of them were in tech jobs, but they didn't want to quit either. Like, they were very comfortable. I had no money, so I asked them, "Can you refer any people that you work with in any of your previous companies, even if they are, not looking? That's fine. I think I can convince them. Just refer, right?" So I ran a referral campaign, not a campaign, but I asked all my friends to refer. And then one of my friends, Bharat, he had worked with Rahul and Akshay in Simplilearn. So one was a back-end engineer, one was a front-end engineer, which was perfect for me, right? I needed both. He told me, like, these are couple of the hardest working people I knew, but I don't think they will quit where they are, right? So I said, don't worry about that. So I called them up, I met them, and I said, I don't want you to quit because you don't know me and I don't know you. It's too risky a decision. So let's work together for 6 months in a part-time capacity. You do your day job. I just need 2-3 hours of your time in the nights, and then on the weekends, a few hours, and then I'll pay you for it. So it's extra income for you, right? So that engagement went on for like 6 to 8 months before even Rahul and Akshay joined us, right? So I was paying them. So the initial days was pretty tough, right? So I think entire 2017, whatever I was earning just went as payments to everyone. 2018, we raised the first check from GSF. That was 200K. Yeah. That's when we quit our jobs. But then I was paying myself like 30K a year, right? Or 25K a year. I don't remember, right? So it was brutal because I had one kid, and then we were expecting one more, and it was pretty bad. But I had to do it. Like, it had to be done. So there was a hit for 2.5 years, but I'm glad it all worked out in the end. And once we had that initial check, that's when like the engineers joined us. They felt a little safer that, okay, now I can go and join this company. They have money to pay me for 2 years.
No, that's amazing, Deepak. It is also very, very inspiring. I must say that, to have the guts to spend pretty much all your salary in building up your next company with no visibility at that point in time, I think took a lot of gumption, and you clearly had it.
Just to add to that, I used to work in a co-working space here in Hacker Dojo, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs there. All of them used to come, and in 6 months they would quit and then go back to their jobs because they were like, okay, I'm not making money here. I just put my head down and kept working. But I saw all my friends who were in good, well-paying jobs buy fancy cars and houses, and my parents. So the first thing I learned is you have to decouple yourself from societal pressures, right? What your friends buy, what your parents tell you, everything doesn't matter. Because people don't see the future. Like, probably you see the vision, and you just have to be at it, right? Things might work out in the long run.
Very true. Deepak, I mean, you talked about your journey all the way from November 2016. I remember that sometime in, I think it was early 2017. I'm slipping the exact date, but I remember that Anish Reddy from Capillary made an introduction to you, and I think you guys knew each other from IIT Kharagpur. And he mentioned to me, look, you should meet Deepak. He's a great guy. And it's a space that I had been building a thesis on since 2013. At least the belief was that as a lot of data is coming around, you should be able to derive a lot more intelligence from it than what one has been able to do in the past. That being said, even by the time I talked to you, I think I had evaluated several companies in that space before I even met you, right? And not to mention the fact that there were these giants like Zoom Info, there was like Lattice Engines, Infer, several others actually in the space by the time I talked to you. And if I may say so, my first call with you was pretty underwhelming. I thought, yes, this guy has the energy, but frankly, doesn't quite know what he's building or what he wants to do. And I think we discussed and we said that, look, might be best to wait at this point in time, right? Now, I want to flip it from an entrepreneur perspective. It's very easy. The thing is, we meet whatever, 500 companies a year, and we keep making these judgments left, right, and center. But if I flip it from your perspective, Deepak, at what point did you begin to feel that, yes, I'm on the right track and I'm solving it in a way that actually really makes sense? And what sort of gave you that confidence?
Yeah. So look, we had two encounters, one in 2017 and another in 2018, before the funding happened in 2019.
That's right.
The first time in 2017, I didn't even quit my day job, right? I was bootstrapping the company.
Yes.
We had 3 people. So at that point in time, when I met you, I spoke to you on the phone, I believe. It was just an idea, right? It was just an idea. We had no engineers in the company. I think I was telling you that we are trying to hire a first engineer. We didn't have a product. It was just an idea. And I realized that, it was wrong time, absolutely wrong timing, right? Like, and I was probably looking for advice more than anything else. But from a VC standpoint, from investor standpoint, you would like to see some semblance of product, right? Like or at least ability to hire engineers, right? Before you could make an investment. So at that point, the thoughts were evolving. I also remember our encounter in 2018, late 2018, Alok. Again, we had not I'd come to you knocking on your door and at Stellaris office, I think Indira Nagar. We had like a 1.5 hour chat in a conference.
Yep.
And Rahul had also come, and then we had like another 1 hour, 1.5 hour. And at the end of it, you had asked a question. You said, Deepak, do you think you're really ready for funding? And I paused, took like a few deep breaths and said, no, right? I said no, and I said, I'll come back when I'm ready, because it felt like, what VCs were looking for from an early stage company wasn't still there at that point in time, right? We were building product. We just launched the MVP at that time, when we met in October. But we had, But then 8 months later or 6-7 months later, we made good progress. And then I came back to you, and this time you said, yeah, let's invest. So I remember we had a pretty long journey. But to answer your question, what was going through my mind, I somehow take these things very positively. Like if a VC, maybe it's just because of my sales experience, that I'm used to rejection all the time, right? Like my past rejection, I know 99% people will reject, and that's okay. Like I don't take it on my ego. So I think when I see rejection, the only thing I think is, where should I improve? And the next time I pitch, I should be better. So I always took it pretty positively, and kept working on the pitch and the product.
No, this is what sets you apart, Deepak. This is truly what sets you apart. And I do remember those meetings. I remember, by the way, we spoke in early 2018 also. And then we met in October 2018. And then we re-engaged in early 2019. And so by the time we actually partnered together, we had seen an evolution over a 2-year period on how you had evolved. Let me ask the $1 million question, or whatever, the $100 million question, Deepak, which is, and this is a topic we have discussed in SaaS Talks in the past, often talked about, often written about, and nobody still has a perfect answer, I think, on this question. Even when we came in, I remember that you had about 7 to 10 customers, very early customers, and some of them very small customers as well, right? And while coming in, we were trying to figure out for ourselves whether there is product market fit or there is not a product market fit, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that product market fit is like that elephant, and everybody else is like a blind mice, where we all see a different picture of the same animal, right?
Yeah.
From your perspective, at what point did you begin to feel that, look, I have a product market fit? And if you were telling other founders, what are those things to look for at which you begin to feel confident that, yes, I think I have actually found the product market fit?
Yeah. To be honest, Alok, I still feel it's relative. Like I still feel I'm not sure if we found product market fit. For me, the definition has always been like, how confident are you? It's more than an absolute term. It was more a relative term always. Like, how confident are you that that you are moving towards product? I mean, today we have 250 customers, right? So,
Yeah.
but in the initial days, I think when we had 7 to 10 customers, I remember like I used to talk to VCs and say, yeah, we have product market fit, like very confidently, right? That, I mean, as an entrepreneur. But I feel like my definition evolved. I met Mohit Aaron from Cohesity one day, and his definition stuck in my mind. He said, when an average sales guy is able to sell to the average customer, you have
Indeed.
product market fit. And then my definition of that changed again when I looked at retention and churn and all of that. Then I felt like product market fit is when you see a good number of customers renewing with you, right? It's not just, it doesn't end at sale. And so I think it's been a constantly evolving decision, right, or metric for me. But one good measure is when the market is when the segment of your market, obviously you can't focus on the entire market on day zero. You choose SMB versus enterprises, etc. You choose a niche, right? But when a good portion of that niche is lapping up the product, you're getting demos, you're getting closures, you're getting renewals, and you're getting product love, right? You're getting good G2 ratings, etc. I think entrepreneurs will know when they see all of this that yes, there's some magic happening, and there's something happening which is product market fit.
Indeed. And as you can see, it is a fuzzy concept in the end. And you're right. Yeah. There are lots of different definitions, but I like your definition that it's not just about an average sales guy selling to an average customer. When the next year comes, will this customer renew or not? Is also a pretty good definition of product market fit. When you entered this space, Deepak, again, and I referred to it earlier also, at least I thought it was already a crowded space. Mm-hmm. And even as we started walking the journey together, it felt that it is a crowded space. And I remember that sometimes during our board discussions, you began to talk about the fact that, look, since there are other players in this, and you started with, as you said, you started in the direction of technographics. That's how initially we came in. That technographics sort of expanded to intent. But at one point you said, look, that's not enough. I need to have everything, firmographic, contact, all kinds of data. I need to achieve feature parity with ZoomInfo. Yeah. Right. And, at one point I thought this guy must be out of his mind, that you're taking ZoomInfo just head on. Why are you doing that? But of course it was a bold call and a very smart call, but I'm actually thinking, why did you take the call, or how did you take the call of going head on against a massive player, which was, by the way, also IPOing for $24 billion around that time frame, as opposed to saying that, look, I'll carve out my own niche. I don't need to go head on against this giant.
Yeah. Great question. So honestly, when we started off, Alok, it was all about technography. It was all about finding that niche that, where we can excel and where we can double down on and going really deep, right? But what happened as we onboarded more and more customers, and initially we would just come as an add-on to ZoomInfo, right? We would say, hey, you use ZoomInfo, you use whatever product you're using for leads, firmographics, etc. But Slintel has much better technographics, and we put all our engineering resources, everyone on technographics, right? So we knew our technographics was way better. So we would use that as a segue and would say, just use technographics from Slintel. Yeah. Eventually in the B2B space, customers do decide, like, to a large extent, your product roadmap, right? To a very large extent. And again, there's a saying that when 80% of your customers are asking for the same thing, you probably need to build it, right? Yep. And that was what happened in our case. Like, most of the customers came to us and said, you're telling me all this technographic information, which is good, but how is it actionable, right? How do I know whom to contact, what to write? And then I also need to segment that information. Just telling me Oracle uses Salesforce, or Oracle probably will never use Salesforce, so that's a bad example. Say Samsung uses Salesforce is not enough. Yeah. Like, you need to let me know all the firmographic and all the parameters that are required to customize. So we thought about that, and it was actually like, it wasn't a quick decision. We spent like 3-4 months, I think, at that time, thinking, should we do this or should we not do this? And finally the call was, I mean, you have to make hard calls, and the call was, let us do it. But having said that, Alok, our mindset was always that, there has to be one area where you are 10x better than competition, especially in well-established spaces. You can't just build feature parity and compete. Like, it won't work, right? So there has to be one emerging or niche area like intent or technographics where you're 10x better.
Yeah.
And the other areas we try to get to parity. And we figure out like one or two more areas that are better.
No, lots of critical messages, and I really like Deepak. And maybe for context, I'll add on to what you said for all the audience. When we initially spoke and you pitched, you said that, look, I'm going to build technographics, but I'm going to build a downstream engine for sales engagement. What used to be outreach, Salesloft, etc. And I remember very clearly that was our product roadmap, right? And I think it at least tells me two important things, which is that go ahead.
Just to add a look, we actually built the outreach product. If you remember, we spent 4 months engineering effort. We built it, and on the day we were about to launch, we took a call and said, let's not launch it, because we felt like the moment we launch it, there'll be bugs and there'll be issues, and then we'll be dealing with two different products and we won't know where to focus.
Indeed. Yeah. But what that tells me is that, look, as a founder, one, you need to have the vision of the product, and you always need to have a roadmap. But what you also demonstrated was the flexibility and being nimble on your foot and saying that, look, if it doesn't make sense, I'm not going to just do it because that's how I thought historically. As you said, in B2B markets, it's your customers who define your roadmap, and your customers told you, let's build a different roadmap, not the one you thought that we should be doing. And I will say that as an investor, I felt very jittery when you took some of those calls.
Yeah.
But I admire the fact that you took or you followed your gut and sort of went in the direction that you wanted to go. But kudos to you. I'm going to change track from product to something else. But Arpit, I don't know if you had any questions for Deepak on the product side before we move on to, I was actually going to go on the hiring side and team building next.
Actually, I don't have any very specific question on the product side. I do want to add, I think, just or maybe reiterate that piece around perseverance that we were talking about earlier and how you bootstrapped the company. I mean, at some point, maybe that was one of the things that we highlighted, I think, multiple times in our internal discussions as well, when we were thinking about Syntex. And it's something that I've talked to many entrepreneurs since, actually.
Right.
So
Deepak, I'm going to move on to building the team now next. And I'm particularly bringing it up because I find that most entrepreneurs end up delaying hiring people in senior roles or actually even in other roles. But I remember that you took some very proactive calls. So when we came in, I think you had 2 salespeople, is what I recollect at that point in time. And you very quickly said, and I frankly, at that point, it's not as if we were bringing in big moolah on a monthly basis. And you said that, look, I think we need to hire somebody to lead the account executive team. And that's the time that Anupreet came in, right? And similarly, I remember that you actually brought some other leaders. Gradually, I remember that you brought in Anurag for product, etc. Help me understand, how did you make the judgment calls in your mind? Because this has very many implications as a founder. You are increasing your burn on one side, right? Yep. Sometimes you may also be worrying that, look, if senior people come, will they have a role to play given the size of the company that I'm in? At the same time, if I don't bring the senior people in, how am I going to build the team that I need to build? But what were these different mesh of thoughts in your mind as you were hiring some of these senior folks?
Yeah. I think when you find great people, look, you probably can't time hiring great people, right? You build relationships all the time. And then when they are ready to join or when you're ready to hire them, you should. Because honestly, it's very difficult. In my journey, at least, I've always felt that hiring good leaders and great people is much more difficult than pitching to VCs, especially if you're hiring good engineers or product people or even sales leaders. It's a lot more difficult, right?
True.
Getting money is not that difficult, but getting the right VC is. But hiring people. So I actually, if I go back to my roots, I used to work in Eightfold, if you remember,
Yeah.
and I was a big fan of Ashutosh Garg's entrepreneurship ability. And I would observe him. And Ashutosh Garg was the founder of Bloomreach and now Eightfold, which is, again, both of them are unicorns.
Yeah.
So I would observe him getting into every candidate hiring pitch, right? He would invite candidates to the conference room and he would spend 1.5 hours, 2 hours with product managers or with any candidate that he's hiring. And I listened to some of the pitches. And he would get so passionate. He would talk to them about the whole vision, the whole pitch deck. And then I asked him one day, like, why do you do that? He said, these are what make the company. And when I was there in Eightfold, I was fortunate enough to see the first 18 people that he hired were all people from Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, engineers who would never join like a startup, right? And it was only because of the passion and the vision and the dream that you explained to them. And you treat every candidate pitch as a VC pitch. So that, I think, was inculcated in me like from those days. And with Anupreet joined us as a sales leader. So I'll give you a small backstory to it. So very interesting story. So when Anupreet was in Metal, we were trying to sell to Metal, right? He was in San Francisco. I didn't know who Anupreet was. One of my founders just told me, hey, go meet Anupreet. He's there, and try and sell Strintel to him, right? So we met at a coffee shop and we started chatting. We didn't talk about the product. We didn't talk about the sell. And then he said, I have some time. Can we go have some drinks together? Right? So we went, had some drinks. And then we didn't talk about the product sale at all. He said, we just like became good friends. And I asked him how long he's in SF for. He said 2 weeks. I invited him to my house. Right. So my wife was mad that you're bringing a stranger home and who's this guy? Right?
You owe a lot of things to your wife, Deepak. So.
Yeah. I told her, no, I met him like a couple of days ago. But yeah. So he stayed with us for 2 weeks.
Wow.
We became even better friends, etc. And this was all when he was in Metal. Metal got acquired by Mercer, and we stayed in touch. So when the moment arrived, Alok, he reached out and he said, Deepak, I'm also looking for a move. I know you. And we had raised some small amount of money then. And he said, can we join hands? But I will join us if you hire me as a leader. At that time, we were not looking to hire leaders. And then I remember I'd come to you and said, he's a really great guy, a really good leader. I really want him because I know him and I know what he's capable of. But maybe the timing is not. So that's why I feel like when you have those great people, like if I didn't hire him then, he would have gone to some other company, right? Even if I took the hit on cash flow and I took a bet on him, it paid off. Right? So with all these great leaders, I feel it's like you have to be persistent, and whenever they're ready, you hire them. Another example, Alok, is our engineering director, Vineet and Krishnan. We hired them from Flipkart and Microsoft. It took like 6 months of pitching, I believe, like Anurag as well. So Anurag joined us from McKinsey and he was a founder. So all of these hires, relentless chasing them down. I don't know how many times with VCs, I may have done the pitch one time. With them, you have to do it 3 or 4 times. And then, yeah. So, but you need really strong leaders, and you need to treat every single important hire as a VC and give your best every single time.
No, indeed, couldn't agree more, Deepak. I think what makes or breaks a company, I think, is the quality of hiring you do in the end.
Going back to the product, I did have one question which popped into my mind. I'll shoot with it nonetheless. And Deepak, I remember when we first invested, I think one big, I would say, area that we thought we would have to fill a gap in ultimately would be the product side, in the sense that both you and Rahul, you had like a very strong sales background. Rahul came with a tech background. And on the product front, I think, I remember we spent a lot of time talking to folks before Anurag finally joined. But in the meantime, also, I think one of the things I observed was that over time, the quality of discussion that we would have in our board calls or otherwise on the product front, I think it was almost like a sea change that happened in some sense. It became one of the most, I would say, structured and most deep discussion on product, at least in board calls that I can think of in the companies I work with. So how was that journey like for you on building that depth and expertise in a function which you had not handled earlier, both of you guys?
Yeah, that's right. So I was coming from a sales background. Rahul was coming from engineering. It was new to us, but it had to be done, and we didn't have a product leader on board. So I think both of us shared responsibility on product vision, and we would dedicate most of. My thought process was hire leaders in functions where you can delegate stuff and move to the next one, right? So once Anupreet joined sales, I moved to marketing and then customer success, and then once we had the leaders in all these three functions, I had a lot more time for product, and so did Rahul. So we just ended up spending a lot of time, every single day, sleeping, thinking, brainstorming about the product, putting slides together, discussing. Yeah, so a lot of effort went into that. And then, we hired like a couple of product managers down the lane because we couldn't hire a product director. Like we didn't have like good folks, and we didn't want to compromise on, I think some hires we just didn't want to compromise on, right? So we hired a couple of product managers, but we were doing all of that ourselves at that time.
Got it. No, awesome.
Yeah. Deepak, I'm going to switch on the go-to-market side and a bunch of different questions. And, I remember that many of these we have discussed in the past as well, but will be useful to get the context now from a Slintel point of view in this thing. I remember, first of all, that when we started, your playbook was very outbound driven, right? And at one point in time, you shifted the motion. I actually don't want to use the word shifted. You added the inbound motion because outbound continued, but gradually you became more and more inbound centric, right? So what gave you the confidence that, look, inbound is the direction to go? Were there any initial A/B tests that you did that sort of told you that, yes, I think if I invest more in this direction, it's actually going to help me, right? So if you did those, what were those? And how did you sort of decide that I'm going to go all out for inbound?
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, I had zero inbound muscle, right? I was a pure outbound guy. I remember we both had this discussion where I said, I'll build the outbound engine, and you asked me to really think about inbound, right? You said ours is a very well searched category, and therefore there should be inbound. So my thoughts now are if entrepreneurs here have a product in a very well searched category or a well established category, inbound, if done properly, will significantly trump outbound, right, in terms of leads, if done properly. Now, every category is different. Like, for example, Freshdesk, if you look at Freshdesk versus Zoho versus Slintel versus PagerDuty, there are categories where the spend on ads, for example, if you're looking at ads as a channel, could be 3 times the ACV. There are categories where the spend on ads could be like, less than 1 time the ACV. So I think, but you'll have to figure out like what's your cost of acquisition like, retention like, and whether you want to spend money or not. But yeah, that's the broad lens I use now. Like if it's a well-established category, inbound should work, and if it's not working, then you need to fix it, right? If it's not a well-established category, if it's an emerging category, then inbound might work few years down the lane when it becomes well-established. But right now, like initially, you may have to just outbound and get deals. Also, the other lens is when you're doing large enterprise deals, in some cases, you have no choice but to do outbound, right? But if you're doing a lot of SMB, and if you're doing very low enterprise deals, you again have no choice but to do inbound. You can't hire sales reps to sell like a $30 per month product, right? So in these two extremes, you actually have no choice. But if you're in the middle, you do have choices, and you have to make those decisions. In our case, Alok, if you remember, initially we just had the outbound engine, and my thesis was that we should put up multiple fires and see which one sticks. So for inbound, we tried content first, right? And we learned the hard way that content, takes time. It has to be done. There's no going around it, right. But it will take time. So it doesn't give you leads immediately. The two channels that give leads immediately are SEO and SEM in inbound. SEO, no brainer, like invest in SEO. I would ask everyone to do that. Improve the site SEO and get as many leads as you can through SEO. SEM, for companies like Freshworks, Zoho, even for Slintel, ChargeBee, like there's so many companies where SEM works really, really well, right? Sure.
Sure.
And therefore that SEM hire is critical. The other thing about SEM, which is ads, is I learned is you have to be a little patient about this engine. The first 3 months or first 6 months, you may get zero results. But that doesn't mean you cut budgets and you stop the channel. Like as long as you're seeing searches, you probably have to improvise your landing pages, your ad copies, your graphics, because it's again a relative thing, right? You're competing with like all your competitors. Continuous optimization and hire more and more like SEM folks or better SEM folks. But once it starts working, and once you start seeing value, that channel becomes like not infinitely scalable, but like massively scalable, right? In well search categories, like you can build. I remember, look, we had this discussion. We could have gone to like 10 million ARR just with inbound without even having the outbound engine.
I agree.
And so can any company who has a very well established category and a good product. So yeah.
Deepak, in fact, my belief is that in well search categories, given how rapidly the go-to-market motions from India are evolving, I feel that you can go to even 20, 30 million ARR now quite easily. We are seeing that in other companies. So I think it has a lot of power. Not to say that outbound is not important, but in well search categories, I have 2-3 more questions that I do want to ask, but in the meantime, also wanted to ask the audience that if they want to post any question on the Q&A panel, and please do it on the Q&A panel, not on the chat on the chat box. We will be happy to take those up with Deepak as well. Deepak, one of the areas I remember we explored was this whole debate between sales-led growth versus product-led growth. And I think in your industry itself, you have seen all kinds of motions. You have seen the likes of Lasha, which are following a very product-led approach. You were in a sales-led approach. And I remember that this discussion lasted about 6 months in the board, yes, right? And several experiments. Having been through this journey, would love for you to sort of relate back to your experience and give advice to other entrepreneurs saying, when would you do product-led growth versus when would you do sales-led growth? How would you actually make those kinds of decisions?
Yeah. Before I even answer that question, Alok, HubSpot, I remember we had a big discussion about HubSpot, and yes, I myself was surprised to find out that HubSpot was sales-led growth until I believe they hit like maybe 100 million.
Yeah. Until 10, $15 million is actually, you're right. No, even much more than that. My apologies. They were much larger. Yes.
Much larger. Yeah. So a lot of people think HubSpot is product-led because it looks product-led right now, but they were sales-led for the longest time. Indeed. Before they moved to product-led, and Yamini confirmed that. As we spent like many months on this, and the more we dived into this, the more we realized that product-led growth is basically, it's not just a product change, right? It's a DNA change in the company. Like in product-led growth, every single human intervention is considered a bug, right? Yep. And you need to eliminate that bug. You shouldn't have customer success people like handling it. Even if you have that today, tomorrow you should not have a person doing that, right? You shouldn't have sales guys selling it. So every single thing is pure self-serve, from sign up, convert, and then your metrics are very different. You're looking at how many activations am I getting, how many, right? So your entire product company DNA is product-led. In a sales-led motion, you look at entirely different metrics. You're all about, what's my cost of acquisition? How much am I paying my sales guys, marketing cost, and then, you do demos and you close deals.
Yep.
What I think is dangerous is like having both motions at the same time. And I think for us, we already had a sales-led motion that was working very well. And I know in the board, it was brought up multiple times. Hey, Deepak, why don't you move to a product-led motion, right? Multiple times. It was a dangerous territory because our entire DNA, our entire company, and we were looking at small numbers. We didn't even reach like what numbers were sales-led. So we could have made that shift, but that would have meant a shift in every single aspect, and it could have gone either way, right? So for us, the reason we decided not to make that shift at that point in time, because we saw the sales motion that was working really well for us. We had inside sales reps in India, marketing, low cost, closing deals super fast. We were scaling 5x year in a year, and why break things that are working? It doesn't make any sense, right? Like maybe when you stagnate, you start thinking of other channels. So that was our whole thought process behind this.
No, very well put. Very well put. It's not just a simple experiment. As you said, it's a change of whole DNA. when you go towards product-led growth. And it's not as if you start with sales-led, you will never be a product-led, like you mentioned in case of HubSpot. So Deepak, I'm going to take a question from the Q&A panel from Sanjay Rathi. How did you go about deciding how to price your product?
Yeah, so pricing is always iterative. I mean, we started with, I think at one point we were even selling like $100 per month product, right? In the initial days. But then it's okay wherever you start, right? You can start as low as you can, but you have to keep testing. You have to keep going higher. And if you're in a well-established category, the pricing is already set by the market leader or your major competitors, right? So unless you have a phenomenally better product, you can't charge higher, right?
Yeah.
In a well-established category, and you don't want to go too low. You don't want to like lose out on margins, right? So I think in well-established categories, you would already know the price that is there in the market for products like yours. And then you start slow because your product initially has very little features. And then as you build features, keep pushing the bar. Every interaction, every prospect interaction, you kind of raise the price by 50%, 100%, and see where you meet resistance. And that's where you stop. And sometimes you'll say like, don't even stop, like just keep pitching, larger companies will pay more, etc. But yeah, initially our pricing was one price fits all. Now, if you see like our pricing is more based on the size of the customer, because that determines their spending power, the number of users they want, and the usage that they want. So we have factored all of these in.
So Deepak, I have a question, I have a related one then to what Sanjay asked. There are two schools of thought. One that says keep pricing very simple. One single basis metric, very simple to understand. And there is another school of thought that says keep it actually more complex. Have multiple variables in it, because it allows you more flexibility in the way you want to price in a particular situation. Then which of the two camps do you fall into?
So I actually, I've always done deals that in the second camp. So I fall into the second camp. Keep pricing very simple. Like the challenge there is if you have one price fits all, I don't think even companies like Freshworks have that, right? Like they have a sales team that they go to a 10,000 employee company and pitch a $100,000 product versus small companies who pay $10 per month, right? So if you have a one size fit all, what happens is you're either undercutting the max potential of like larger companies, or you're overcharging the small companies, right? One size can't fit all because everybody has different budgets and different spending powers. So you'll have to like variabilize it. Think about either number of users or usage, or outcome-based pricing, or time-based pricing. You'll have to think of what is the variable that you can have and scale it in a way that like big companies pay you more.
True. By the way, for the record, I also belong to the second camp. I think that as you are in SMB space or the lower end of the market, simple is good. As you go slightly up market, even in mid market, actually you cannot have a very simple pricing. Actually, I think it hurts you rather than helps you.
In some cases, Alok, what happens is a lot of companies, product-led companies, they put a flat price for companies up to say 500,000 employees, and then after that it's talk to sales, right? And talk to sales is the variable, so they don't bother about the lower end, and they say, okay, we'll just sell flat, but then we start scaling at the higher end. So
good. There is another question, Deepak, which I'm going to ask after another question. This is on the exit. I was reserving the exit questions in the end. One last question on go-to-market I have, Deepak, which is, and I think there are so many things that stand out in the way you built Slinker, but the one that really stands out for me is the way you did capacity planning. By and large, in many companies that we are part of, we all have lofty goals for revenue, but we always realize that we don't have execution capacity because we grew and we realized we don't have ramped up people in the team to be able to execute against the goals that we need to, right? And right from the time you had, I guess, just 2 people in sales, and I don't even remember whether there was an SDR at that point or not. I think just the way you ramped up everything from marketing to SDR to sales, of course, in the engineering and product, but you were constantly ramping up capacity before we knew that they were required to be able to make the numbers that we wanted to achieve, right? Yeah. And it basically means that you're sort of, playing ahead in some sense and spending ahead of time, so to say. What, again, just curious to hear more about the psychology of doing so than anything else, because theory everybody understands.
Yeah.
But what were the trade-offs going in your mind as you made those calls?
Good you use the word psychology, Alok, because it's all pure psychology. It's just my DNA versus another founder's DNA. And for me, the way I view entrepreneurship is, I view it as a time-based thing, right? Like the only thing that is constant in our life, or is limited in our life, is our lifespan, right? We have a few years. Entrepreneurship is a high-stress environment. You have a few years to make it count. And then on the other hand, you have jobs, right? People like, there's always an option for people to work in a company. So the way I think about it is that, it's not fun like going, like building a company that goes IPO in 15 years or 20 years, right? Because you'll spend your entire life on it. And while it's on one hand, it's rewarding to see that entire journey. On the other hand, we have missed out on so many other journeys and so many other companies and so many other ventures, so much learning in other areas, right? So I come from the Valley School of Thought, where it's, if you're taking a company IPO, go and get there in 5 to 7 years. It's good returns for everyone. You learn a lot, and then you go on to do your new venture. Even for employees, it's very rewarding. Like every single employee I used to hire, I would tell them, hey, we'll scale quickly, we'll burn money, we'll scale quickly, and we'll raise money quickly, and we'll try to get to an exit or IPO quickly, right? I didn't want to build a Kirana shop or a mom and pop store where you take your own sweet time to like scale. But having said that, some of those decisions, when I used to compare myself to other entrepreneurs in India who were hiring at a much slower pace and who were very conservative, like we raised 1.5 million. I think we were blowing that up very, very quickly versus someone else who was like taking a very long time to spend that money. But overall, the thought, Alok, was that there's enough money from VCs for the right companies, right? And if you scale fast, even VCs want to see fast scale. Like they want to see 3x growth in 1 year, not 3x in 3 years, right? If you scale fast and spend money fast, there's enough money waiting for you at the end of the tunnel. And vice versa, like you might just lose the company. So that was going on.
No, true. Nothing matters as much as growth. And Deepak, the way I think about you is that you are someone who wants to run the ultra marathon, but do it at sprint speed. So, exactly. And you truly did that. Deepak, we have only 12 more minutes. There are 2 questions, and I think both of them will take some time. So I'm going to read the first one from the Q&A panel, which is from Subramaniam Kasibhat, which says, impressive story, Deepak. I like to ask a standard question you may be getting from all, which is, you seem to be doing great and opted to exit. What were the drivers for such a decision? And Deepak, if I may add to it, very few people get to go through these kinds of M&A opportunities. What were the do's and don'ts of this process? I think will also be useful for people to understand.
Sure. Yeah. So firstly, first things first, we are not even treating this as an exit. Like I know people are congratulating, but a good portion of this deal is in stock. And the way we think about this deal is the exit will happen at IPO. And we have just accelerated our journey to IPO. And we have given ourselves a better chance at it by becoming stronger with a market leader, right? So when we were going through the process, and actually back to the memory lane, we raised 20 million in funding. And from then on, we scaled our revenue 3 times in like 8 months, right? So we had seen super fast growth, and we were doing so well there. But then we got an offer, and we got multiple offers. We said no to a lot of them, but this time we got an offer. We said no. We got a revised offer, and the price also looked good. But more than anything else, we just thought about the various possibilities, right? One is we can say no to the offer. One is we can go fish for other offers, or we can just take the offer, right? So we looked at multiple possibilities and said, if we say no to the offer, this is probably like at this stage, we get an offer, we say no to it, then we have to shoot for IPO, right? We may or may not get an offer in the future. We just have to go. It's another 4 or 5 years of grind or whatever that is. And we have to shoot for IPO, which is absolutely fine. You need the energy, but that's absolutely fine. So in that decision, we looked at the market. In our space, the market was consolidating. So ZoomInfo went IPO, and they acquired 4 or 5 companies after that. And now, if you look at the future, they're going to package all of these products together and start selling it. And similarly, like other players in our space were also consolidating. I think Demandbase acquired a couple of companies. There's a lot of consolidation happening. So it felt like when so much consolidation is happening, staying adamant and saying, no, I'll just fight everyone alone is not an option. So there were two options literally. One was we grow so fast, we get to 15, 20 million ARR fast, do like a 50 or 100 million round, and we acquire companies because we have to do that to compete with the biggies. Either we acquire or we join forces. So these were the two options in my mind. So we acquiring companies meant that, we would probably reach 15, 20 million ARR in like a year or a year and a half. So we had to really accelerate that, raise like a mega round, and then acquire. And by that time, we don't know how the market would have changed. So all of these were going in my mind, and we felt like when we looked at 6sense, they were market leaders, super high NRR. They're going public in most likely in 2-3 years. And the deal was like they gave the option of stock, right? So it seemed like a very good deal. And then when we negotiated, employees were getting great packages, investors were happy, everything worked out in the end.
True. No, fantastic. Any lessons learned in the any do's and don'ts of an M&A process, because it has its own complexity? Any advice you would give to founders?
Yeah, I used to hear from founders who exited through M&A that when I would talk to them about fundraising, they would just say, wait and watch till M&A. M&A is like 10 times difficult than fundraising. I honestly felt it was like 100 times difficult than fundraising. Even though in this case, like we never approached, we were, again, there's a saying that companies are bought, not sold, right? So it was the buyer who really wanted to buy, but the overall complexity of the process is not because of the buyer or the seller, right? It's just because of the amount of paperwork involved, so you'll have compliance folks, tax folks, lawyers, accountants, everybody scrutinizing every single item in the books, right? A balance sheet item, that you would have like spent on the team spend, or everything is scrutinized. And there's so much learning in that process too, but there's so much scrutiny. So yeah, I would say one do's and don'ts. One is keep your books clean. If your books and your finances are not in order, hire someone, even if you can't hire, outsource it. It's super, super important. Stay compliant with all of the labor laws and all of the laws, right? In our case, like even laws outside of California and Delaware, we looked at, do we owe taxes in any other states? In India, like all possible compliances, all possible laws, stay compliant, hire someone to do that. And the last thing would be, just be honest in the process, right? Because when an acquirer is acquiring a company, if they find some surprises or unknowns, the question in their mind is, what else is hiding? What else are they hiding that? Yeah, and they'll pull out of the deal. Yeah. So be as honest in the process. And M&As take time, so they would take anywhere from 2 to 6 months. Sometimes, pretty long. It's a very long process. So you don't want to spend 2-3 months. The acquirer comes into your kitchen, looks at all the dishes and walks away, right? And you lose a lot. So you want to be honest up front and tell them, this is what we have. It's your call whether if you want to go in this direction or not. So just be as honest, as transparent, and keep all your books clean is what I would say.
Great. Deepak, with that, I'm going to ask the last question, which has come from Sayan Ghosh, who, in addition to sort of congratulating you, also wants to ask, what are the key things you could have done differently at Slental?
Yeah, a lot of things actually. So one is now I feel like if I do my second startup, right, like in maybe a couple of years, I don't know when. So I feel like I can accelerate to 10 billion much faster in ARR. So the initial journey for us was long, right? It wasn't easy for us to raise money. It wasn't like we took a long time building product, etc. So I would say if you can hire really great engineers and product folks early on, do that. Like it took us a lot of time to hire good product folks and good engineers. Do that. Build the product quickly, raise money quickly. I would, we still think that we went like at a pretty fast pace, but I would actually double the pace, right? I would think of like 10 million in 1 year or 1.5 years, and then raise, because in product companies, I feel there are few spaces where you can build massive companies, and to build that, you have to really, really accelerate. Like you have to become big very fast and start acquiring companies before the competition enters the space. So yeah, I would just like build things faster, hire leadership sooner, engineers, co-founders, everything. Like I would try to accelerate that.
Fair enough. Deepak, there are no more questions either from the audience or from my side, but again, I wanted to just wrap it up for today. Number one, by congratulating you. I think seeing the journey from what you started to what you sort of made it to be, it's just absolutely fabulous. And therefore, thanks to you to give us a ringside view of this entire journey, right? I mean, we would be divided of watching such a spectacle if we were not part of it. And thank you so much for keeping us there. And lastly, I do believe in what you said. I think this was first innings for Slintel. It's not the end. The second innings start now. And I mean, having had the opportunity to speak with the leadership of Sixth Sense, I think this marriage couldn't be better. And if you were playing in this field, now you're playing in this field. You have a much bigger stage. So all the best to you, to Rahul, to the entire team, as you now begin to play your second innings, and look forward to watching you to grow to even bigger heights now.
Well, thank you so much, Alok. It was a pleasure. This entire journey with you, start to finish, was an absolute pleasure for me. And then, if any entrepreneur in Stellaris portfolio or anyone here wants to reach out, please feel free to. I'm happy. Like, I have more time now, so I'm happy to help in whatever way I can or invest. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you so much, Deepak. All the best.
Bye-bye.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Alok. Arpit. Bye.
Bye.
See you.